Hi, it's Tanya from Trauma Talk, and this is episode 12, where I cover coping and soothing, although mostly I think I talk about unhelpful coping patterns, ways that we have developed to cope with the stuff that's happening to us based on what we've coped with previously. So the definition of trauma, at least the one that I prescribe to, is the one that defines trauma as what happened to us as a result of not being able to cope or the lack of ability to self-soothe. So for us to be able to cope by ourselves or have somebody else there to help cope and navigate us through it. So if you think about somebody who is experiencing something really traumatic, like a motor vehicle accident, and they show up at the emergency department, they are in a distressing state, and what ends up saving them from having trauma out of that event is the people that are around them during and immediately following the exposure. So if they can be partnered with a nurse that shows up and guides them and makes them feel calm and safe and secure and alleviates that fear that they have within their body and allows them to emotionally regulate, that's how we get pulled out of that traumatic experience. So when you're a child and you don't have somebody come along and help you learn from them how to regulate your nervous system, then you lack emotional regulation. So that's when we get trauma, because we couldn't protect ourselves. So trauma is very subjective. What you experience as trauma is not necessarily what someone else would experience as trauma, because they may have coped differently or they were raised in an environment that demonstrated how to self-soothe. So when the age of trauma or traumatic experience is when one is very young, it can cause really long-term effects and lasting damage to your nervous system. We become dysregulated, and which means we have difficulty managing our emotional responses. So it's not that we don't understand emotions or don't experience emotions. We certainly do experience emotions. Our responses are often not in line with what the emotion is that we're experiencing, or it may be completely disproportionate in the event of somebody who has complex PTSD or PTSD in that matter. So you think about a war vet when he's at home and he hears a car backfire that simulates the sound of gunfire. They may overreact or have a reaction that is disproportionate to the sound that they heard, in the sense that they could all of a sudden duck and cover, or they could get aggressive and protective. Those types of things happen out of the exposure that you've had to trauma. So sometimes when we are going along in our lives, everything's fine, and then something comes along that reminds us of the trauma that we experienced before. Right. And it could be as simple as a smell. It could be as simple as, the way that a room feels. Like there's a lot of different ways that we can have our traumas triggered. And then we end up acting as though that's unfolding in front of us now. And so we can act in a disproportionate manner, and that causes problems for us. It really does as adults. I mean, it might have saved us as a child, but it no longer does now. So our nervous system doesn't remember or was never taught how to regulate. And it wasn't taught that you were safe or that life was safe. And instead, we acquire coping habits that bring us attention or keep people away from us, right? We either are doing things because we are neglected and our needs aren't being met. So we throw, as children, temper tantrums, or, we go into a crying fit. So we demand to be held, we get clingy, all of those things. Well, as a child, you can allow your child to throw a temper tantrum, but when you're an adult, throwing that temper tantrum to get some attention doesn't serve you. It doesn't help you or benefit you in any way. So often we have great difficulties in understanding what we are experiencing emotionally, because we have dissociated from our bodies in a lot of ways, or we have blocked out memories, or we just have not learned to regulate, and we're not understanding what the emotion is. Sometimes we think that we're acting out in anger. Meanwhile, it's because we're hurt. We're disconnected. So what are some of the coping habits that we acquire, and how do they affect us today? So one of them is all or nothing thinking. So it's a thinking pattern where it's either good or bad. It's one or the other. It is black and white, cut and dry. It is you are either dumb or you're smart. You are either a success or you're a failure. So it's very, very concrete, all or nothing. There's no middle grounds. There's no areas of gray. So when something happens to us, we turn on ourselves and go very quickly to name calling. Instead of it simply being a mistake, it's a full on, I'm a failure. And that's not the way that life functions, right? There's varying grays. Things happen along a spectrum, right? You are not dumb or smart. You are varying degrees of intelligence, and in different areas you have different levels of intelligence. And sometimes people are intelligent in one area and maybe lack knowledge in a different area, but that doesn't mean that they're dumb. So you have to be able to look at the shades of gray in the situation to be allowed to see more clarity and more truth, right? We have to acknowledge that there's a spectrum, right? Another one is filtering or jumping to conclusions. So although we consistently screen information that is coming into our environment, we're filtering what occurs. But when we're doing filtering, what occurs is that we screen out all the positive and neutral just to focus on the negative. So if something good happens to us, we discount that good thing happening to us like it was a stroke of luck. Something just miraculously happened. We didn't get it because we were deserving or because we were competent or whatever, right? When we focus on our lack or what we perceive we're missing out on, or each and every negative thing that's happening, or worse, we just imagine all these terrible things that we haven't had nor likely will even experience. So if you focus on the negative, you create that negativity and more of that negativity in your life, and it's likely to drive you into a depressed state. So you have to try to remind yourself to look at the bigger picture and try to find whatever you can focus on that's in the positive or neutral realm, that is not just all negative, right? There's in Japanese, I can't remember the man's name. I just remember that he's Japanese, or it comes from Japanese process, or the word's escaping me, I apologize. But what his thing was it would congratulate you, right? You got divorced. Congratulations. Now you get to, explore who you are and, maybe find the person that fits you in a more holistic way, right? So he would, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so sorry that you're having a divorce," he would congratulate everybody no matter what the news was. And if it was bad news, he still congratulated them. He just spun it in a positive way. I lost my job. Oh, congratulations. That means that you have the opportunity to pursue what you've always wanted to pursue, or you have the opportunity to go to school and learn more, or you have the opportunity to do that entrepreneurial thing that you were thinking of. There's different ways that he would do it, but it's what you need to do is look at what's happening and try to find what the best part of it is when it's something negative or when it seems to be something bad. Oftentimes we find out years down the line or months down the line or even days later that the decision that we made at that time or the thing that happened to us seemed like the worst. I mean, I lost a job once, thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and yet the next job that came along was so much better than that one that it ended up being the best thing that happened to me. I have lost opportunities for jobs, which in the end, it was very, very clear that was the best thing that could have happened to me. So you have to remember that there were lots of times when something happened to you that you thought was so terrible and it was just life destroying or whatever. And you turn around and find out later on that it actually propelled you towards a new chapter in your life that was better than the last, or a new something that was better than the last. On the other end of jumping to conclusions and filtering, there's under focusing. So when I learned about this one, it reminded me of how one processes life when they have ADHD. So it's the lack of focus on one item. So you're focused on everything that's going on, right? Instead of moving from one issue to the next and solving that issue or donating your energy to creatively problem solving in that scenario, you jump to the next problem and to the next problem and to the next problem. There's always a problem. There's always something going on. So you're not focusing or narrowing your vision. You're just thinking about how all of this is wrong, rather than say, in this one piece, this is what's wrong right here. What can I do to address this? Can I address it? If I can't address it, then can I accept it? Right? So sometimes you have to radically accept situations. It doesn't mean that they're bad, or it doesn't mean that they're never going to change. Sometimes it does, but at the current time, you may have to radically accept something. If you sold your house and are in an apartment and you're not happy with your living situation for a little while, you may have to radically accept that that is the fact, that you have to live in that apartment until you reestablish yourself and get to the point where you can be back into a house that you love, right? Like, that's an example of how you would have to. So prioritizing life's demands can help, so then you don't feel overwhelmed. Instead of the all mentality, look at it in bite-sized pieces. You don't have to clean the entire house at once, for example, right? If you look at the house and instead of focusing on the fact that you need to do your dishes, you focus on the fact that, well, I need to do my dishes, and I need to do this, and I need to do that, and I have to do laundry, and I have to do the floors, and then nothing gets done because you're too busy overwhelming yourself with the prospect of all that you have to do, rather than narrowing it down and saying, I have this specific thing to do, and then I'll move on to this that I have to do, and then I'll take this little bite and this little bite. How do you eat a hamburger? One bite at a time. How do you clean a house? One step at a time. How do you do anything? It's one step at a time. It's one piece at a time. Another thing that we use as coping, or as a negative coping habit, is overgeneralization. So when you paint every experience with the same brush, you are overgeneralizing. So if if you have a negative experience at one restaurant, let's say we'll use McDonald's because I think that it exists in pretty much every country at this point. But if you went to McDonald's in, Detroit and had a terrible experience, you would think to yourself, all McDonald's are terrible McDonald's, and you would never eat at another McDonald's. Now, not disputing the quality of the food at McDonald's, I'm using it just for a point. But if you do that, then you're limiting yourself from experiencing something that could be good in another situation, because you've determined that it's bad because it is similar, or because you experienced something before that was negative, that was in the same area as in, like, at another McDonald's. So because one person did it, they will all do it. All girls are crazy because you had one crazy girlfriend. All guys are controlling because you had one controlling boyfriend. Almost knocked my water over. So the best way to avoid this pitfall is to remind yourself of the facts of the situation, right? When you live like that, you're restrictive. You restrict your life. Every experience that isn't positive removes experiencing many valuable opportunities in the future, because you've decided that one experience and every other one like it is going to be negative. So just focus on what the facts are of the situation, or look at it from the aspect of, this is one restaurant who did a bad job. It doesn't mean every restaurant is going to do a bad job, or every restaurant in this particular chain. Another thing that we do is disqualify the positive. You notice this a lot when you are being complimented. You quickly say, it was nothing, anyone could do this, oh, shucks. Or you do the even the better, where you go into the opposite. When somebody says positive to you, you immediately have to say, yeah, but I suck at this, right? Like, you throw that up there, like, it's somehow just so you can disqualify what you've done, right? It doesn't count because it was you. It was just an accident. You just lucked into it, right? Somebody else got it because they were skilled, but you got it because they didn't have any other choices, right? You were all that they could deal with. So anyway, understand that the positive stuff matters too, and understand that when people are complimenting you or giving you credit or being positive towards you, that you are deserving of that, and that it's likely that they're not lying to you, because people are not going to tend to fill people up with positivity. We like to be very negative. So if somebody's giving you a compliment, they more often than not absolutely mean what they're saying, and it comes from a valid and wholesome place, and you should acknowledge it and say, that's absolutely, thank you, right? It's as simple as just saying thank you, and start to recognize you are not entirely negative. You are not entirely bad. You have lots of positive qualities about you and lots of good things in your life. Mind reading. We do this a lot. We presume that we know what everybody's thinking, right? When the phone doesn't ring, you immediately think, oh, they don't like me. They're excluding me because of this thing that I did. Or, I knew she really didn't like me. I knew she was only like doing it to be like a charity case, right? Like we always have, your boss calls you into the office to discuss something and your immediate thought is, I'm getting fired, right? I'm getting terminated because I did this thing wrong months ago. Meanwhile, you've done so many good things, right? So it manifests in many, many, many ways. And you're only doing it because, it manifests in many ways. You're only doing it because you're sorry for me. He looked at me sideways. He must be planning something. She didn't invite me. I knew she didn't like me. They're all assumptions. Again, stick with the facts. So it's a thing that became big in my life, was to just constantly remind myself in situations, whenever I get an emotional response, why am I emotionally responding? What are the facts in this situation? And are there assumptions that I'm making? Am I trying to predict what somebody's saying or thinking? Am I trying to, we'll do with the next one in a moment because it ties in with this one. But we want to stay into the facts. We spend so much time worried about what other people are thinking about us when they hardly think about us at all, right? They just don't. If you're out in public and you pass by somebody, and even if you did something embarrassing, if they thought of you for about 5 minutes, even if it was something hugely embarrassing and they went to work and said, oh my God, you can't believe what I just saw today. I saw this person fall down. Oh, it was funny, right? That's probably about as much thought as they put into it, right? Most times they don't even give it that much thought. Half the time you think that they're thinking about it a lot, but think about yourself and then the last time that you saw somebody do something that was weird or, funny or odd. Do you take it with you for days and days and days? Do you think about them for months and months and months and years? And, no, it's just a passing thing. Sometimes we hardly even recognize it, right? So we need to stop thinking that we can predict or we understand what someone else is thinking, because what we're doing is basing it upon our own thoughts about ourselves. We don't do things or we live small because of our perceived views of what people are going to say or what they think, right? We think somebody thinks that we look funny, so we're not going to go out. Or we think that somebody thinks we can't sing, so we never do. And we miss out on the joy of that for the rest of our lives. So stay in your own head. Stop trying to figure out what someone else is thinking. If you're curious, ask, right? Get confirmation. So if you think somebody didn't invite you because they didn't like you, then ask, why wasn't I invited? And you might be surprised by the response. Sometimes it can be as simple as an oversight. Sometimes it could be a misinterpretation. Maybe they thought that you didn't want to come, or it was something that you might not enjoy. Or maybe they did it because they were trying to be kind, because they're aware of your mental health and they know that big crowds are, say, disturbing for you, and they decided not to invite you because they didn't want to put you in a bad position. Or maybe somebody was going to be there that they knew was difficult for you to get along with. There's many reasons why people do things. So rather than make an assumption, get clarification, right? And if you can't get clarification, stick with the information that you know, those facts. So in tying in with mind reading is fortune telling. So fortune telling, which is obviously similar to mind reading, but instead of thinking that another individual has negative thoughts, feelings, or intentions towards us, we just believe the outcome or the future or the upcoming events are going to be terrible. So a new relationship is already going to end when we start it, right? They're going to figure out at some point that we're not good enough, or they're going to realize everybody's abandoned us up to this point, so they might as well abandon us too. So we're already predicting the end of it at the beginning, right? Or, when you're in the new diet is going to fail, right? You're just doomed from the outset. I'm on this new diet, but I've failed every other one. I'm going to fail this one too. So you've already set yourself up for that failure, and you've never even given yourself the opportunity to succeed. So you're obviously going to fail. Why would you succeed at something that you never gave yourself the opportunity to, right? If you don't believe you can, you can't, right? You cannot tell the future. You're not a mind reader. You don't have a crystal ball that you can peer into and say, tomorrow my life is going to look like this, and this is exactly what I'm going to do, or this is what this person meant when they said that, or this is what the outcome of this job is going to be. I'm going to get this job and it's going to be the best job in the world. I'd like you to paint that picture. Most of us say, I'm going to get this job and I'm going to fail, or I'm going to get fired, right? We want to avoid those pitfalls. So try to, at least if you're going to do it, look at it on the positive, because if you look at it on positive, even if there is a loss, it won't be felt as badly. And the only way to win is to believe that it's possible. So focus on the win. So magnification and minimization. So everything you do sucks. Everything everyone else does is perfect. You exaggerate all of your losses and you expand on everyone's wins. So if you were selected for a new hire for a job, you might say, they must have been desperate. They couldn't have got anybody, so that's why I got hired, right? But if it was your friend, you would say, oh my God, she was so qualified. She had all the right skills. They're so lucky to have you, right? When you do this, you're setting yourself up against higher standards than what you're setting other people against, right? You're putting a different measurement upon yourself, right? So you're creating a situation in which you can never feel good about yourself. Why would you want to do that? Right? You have to try to measure yourself and everybody on the same scale. And it's not okay for you to lie. It's not okay for others to lie. If it's an accomplishment for you to graduate from a course, it's an accomplishment for somebody else to graduate from a course, right? So we have to make sure that the measurements are the same that we apply to ourselves, that we apply to other people. And when it's good for somebody else or it's an accomplishment for them, then it's an accomplishment for us. And we need to celebrate and acknowledge and cheer ourselves on for that. Another thing that we like to do a lot is catastrophizing. And that's when you blow things out of proportion, right? So think when you're a kid and you tell those big stories to get attention, right? It's the same thing, right? You're just, a fight means it's a breakup. Being told that you need to improve in your workplace means that you're on the edge of getting fired. It's always the worst case result is going to happen, and it's big. Like it'd be like if you got a sliver in your finger, you're going to end up having to get your arm cut off because you got gangrene, right? Like that would be the kind of the catastrophizing that would happen, right? It's always big explosion of badness, right? It's not, oh, we had a disagreement and that's all it is. It's just a disagreement. The whole rest of our relationship is intact and whole. We just had a disagreement. It's the relationship is exploding in our faces. It's a catastrophe, right? So it might have gotten you attention when you were a kid, but it definitely doesn't give you attention now. What it does is create havoc in your life, right? You have to focus on what is happening in your life from a smaller perspective, because as you blow it up, your reactions and subsequent actions of others become significantly bigger, and it creates those issues in your relationships and in your life. So deal with the event, not the imaginary outcome of dramatic proportions, right? Dial it back down into the moment. We had a disagreement about, and just, even if you have to journal it out, journaling is a great way to kind of wrap your head around your mind around what's going on, especially if when you're doing the journaling, you're sticking to the facts of the situation as much as possible, eliminating your emotions from the equation, because emotions aren't necessarily based on the facts of the moment. You could be emotionally charged because when your partner says, do this, it in your body is translated to the dad that was telling you do this, and when your dad did that, what followed was a beating. So now when your partner says do that, in your mind you're already getting beat. So you're blowing it out of proportion based on a past experience that coincided with what you're going through now. But that's not what's happening now. And while it may be expected because of previous experiences, it's not likely to be occurring now. So try to stay with the current and present moment and understand where that's being driven from. And journaling can help that. And doing mindfulness when you're in any of these, mindfulness and grounding, breathing exercises, meditation, strongly suggest all of it to help when you're in the decision making. When you do your breathing exercises and you ground and you get mindful, then you have more clarity and understanding and can usually rationalize a little more clearly about what's going on in the present moment. Another one that we do as a negative coping habit is emotional reasoning. So you believe feelings are facts. Interesting how I tied that in there, right? You feel sad, it must mean the other person doesn't like you. My feeling of sadness is based on my assumptions or my views, my perspective, my memories, my previous experience or past experiences, however you want to call it. All of those things, come together, plus my current emotions, what is my resiliency or stress levels at currently, what's all going on in my life, right? So I'm going to base it on all of that. But that's not facts. The stuff that happened before is not fact. Not necessarily, right? So when we're determining all of those situations of what's going on and we're like, well, I'm sad, so that must mean that they're angry or that they're hurting me in some way, right? Because sadness maybe comes from hurt. But they might not be doing anything. They might be being completely normal, but they've triggered a past response. They triggered a trauma from previously, and you're reacting as if it's happening right now. I'm going to decline that because I'm in the middle of taping. Sorry about that. So emotions are complex. They occur as a reaction to thoughts, memories, and related to sensations detected by your senses. So we are at risk of experiencing emotions that are out of line with the current situation because our senses can detect current situations as a threat based on how it compares to a previous event. So if we interpret that a frown means someone dislikes us, it causes us to respond incorrectly with our emotions. So you don't believe everything that you feel, right? Try to reflect on whether you're making a judgment based on only a piece of it, or if you're making a judgment based on the whole. Are you making a judgment based on something that happened in the past? Labeling. This is another very common thing that we like to do. And when you label yourself as deficient because you made an error, that would be an example of that. We focus on beating ourselves up and making it a characteristic or a personality trait rather than accepting that it was not our best or it was an area that we can improve, right? We do this to ourselves, but we also do this to other people, organizations, or situations. Someone who accidentally drops a piece of garbage overseen by you as littering turns them into a pig, right? It's not that one's mistake, it's them as a whole that is damaged in your eyes. So you need to focus your view onto the event and not make it about the whole person, right? People can make mistakes and that doesn't make them a terrible person. They've made a mistake, right? So you can't judge the whole book based on one chapter kind of scenario. So the first step is in identifying what thinking patterns or coping habits that you prescribe to. So understand that you gathered these habits as a way of protecting yourself, and that at one time, labeling all men who came around you as bad kept you safe from more bad touches. When you are an adult, labeling no longer serves you. There are many other ways in which we cope, and some of them are readily accepted by society as normal, right? Perfectionism is another one. But people don't bother you when you're doing perfectionism because they just think that that's a personality trait. That's a type A person who's a workaholic, right? I was called type A for years because you're a workaholic, you're a perfectionist, and you're driven and you're focused and you're whatever. I was disassociated from my personal life and focused on my work because my home life was traumatic. So focus on what you can. So we have to learn to cope in healthy ways, right? Some activities are given a pass in society, like going home and drinking wine to relax is socially acceptable, but the guy that goes home and slams back beers probably doesn't look quite as acceptable, right? And it's because they've compassed wine as having all these health benefits, right? So how many girls are like, oh, wine us, Wine Wednesday or whatever, right? Like, I love my wine. And it's okay. right? It's been justified in a lot of ways. Wine's healthy for you, right? Um, and we do that with other stuff as well, right? Like either whether it's wine, or we absorb ourselves in TV, social media, lots of gossiping. That's another one that we like to do, right? Gossiping. Any of those things that we're using to numb ourselves out, whether it is wine, beer, spirits, weed, any other drug, whether you're using food, any of that. If you are using it to escape reality, you're using it to cope. You're using it to numb out. You're using it to avoid all of those different things, right? We're using it as habits. We use food, porn, television, and social media to escape our lives daily. And while there is a need to shut off, to rest and repair, there are many healthier forms of numbing out that we can do which won't have any negative outcomes. So individuals who resort to numbing out lose out on joy as much as sorrow, and are tracked for health concerns, addictions, and relationship breakdowns. Because if you're not coping in a healthy fashion, then those unhealthy coping habits are going to come to the forefront eventually. Right? In other situations, we get overscheduled and we busy ourselves so much in an attempt to outrun or feel something that the person who's constantly on the go from one activity to the next, scheduled to the max, they're often coping by distractions. So instead of numbing out, they're just filling their life with so many things that they don't have time to sit and think about the stuff that's bothering them or acknowledge what they're going through. And you just keep going and going and going. So between those distracting yourselves to no end or numbing out to no end, you're just occupying yourself in some way so you don't have to address concerns or issues in your life. And the individuals who distract tend to crash and burn, right? Life has a way of making you deal at some point. So when we pause and honor our experiences, we can fully integrate them into our lives and move forward in a wholesome manner. When we stop distracting ourselves and running and numbing out, we get to experience our lives, the good and the bad, the ups and the downs. And after being disassociated for so long, I can tell you having the space to fully feel is amazing, because you feel the joy, right? When you numb out, you don't feel joy the same way. You don't feel love the same way. You don't feel happiness the same way. You don't feel those good emotions in the way that you should, because you're numbing out to avoid feeling anything bad, right? But we've numbed out and cut off the edge of all the good feelings too, right? The sheer joy of eating a cherry tomato. I even did it today before I started recording this video. I love nothing more than coming home and grabbing fresh cherry tomatoes off of the cherry plant, the tomato plant, the cherry tomato plant, and popping them in my mouth. There's just something just joyous about a fresh tomato that I've grown on a plant, and knowing that there's no preservatives, and that I've taken care of this, and it's a beautiful, yummy, fresh bit of fruit of life, of joy, and it tastes delicious, right? So you can absorb yourself into that joy. But before, when you're distracting and numbing out, it was just a tomato, right? So you get to explore a little more, right? I don't want to numb out or distract myself anymore. I like finding those moments in life and enjoying all of those things, even if it means that I have to experience the pain as real pain, or that I have to experience the sorrow as real sorrow. But at least I get to experience the love and joy as real love and joy. And there's so much more of that in the world than there ever is the pain and sorrow. And especially if you focus on the joy, we'll get more joy. You focus on the happy and on the positive and on that stuff, you experience more of it in your life. And you just have to look for little ways to do it. And little ways can be as simple as, if you work with me in Calm Spaces, you get to put a color to an emotion. And if you put a color to joy, then anytime you see that color, you're going to be bringing joy into your life. And you can find a color that's out in the world every time you see it in, when you're driving down the road and you see that color that you've tied to that emotion of joy, and you're going to immediately be put into a joyful state of mind. It's amazing. There is liberation on the other side of pain, and that we hold on to, and additional suffering that we bring into our life when we don't let go. When we ruminate on the past and we just hold those memories and we keep going over them and over them and over them and over them without acknowledging that we experienced that pain, acknowledging that at that time we didn't have the soothing from our parents or our, from the caregivers, the people that were in our lives, and we lacked the ability to soothe or emotionally regulate ourselves. So we ended up having to rely on those coping skills, right? But instead, we just keep going over it and over and over it instead of allowing it to be processed through and to understanding. Instead, we just torture ourselves with it over and over and over again. You're already a survivor, right? Every day that you wake up and take that first breath, you're surviving that day. You're alive, you are living, and it's good, right? So you've already survived. That was the toughest part, was surviving through the initial event. Now it's just recovering and healing. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You just need to heal. You just need to heal that hurt. Reach back in time and tell yourself, I didn't have the coping skills now, but I'm going to show you how to emotionally regulate, and I'm going to give you a hug. I'm going to give you some love. I'm going to tell you you're worthy and you're special and you're safe and protected. And I'm going to keep doing all of those things, right? So look at the coping habits that you have and the thinking patterns that you acquired. Be honest about which ones you turn to regularly, and work on being mindful, grounded, and becoming present before making decisions or acting on your presumptions. I repeatedly say to myself, what are the facts? As a reminder, not to allow my mind to go into mind reading or fortune telling, or I'm going to base this on a previous experience and say that that's absolutely what this one is because it looks like a duck, must be a duck. Meanwhile, there's more than one thing that has a yellow, get into that, right? So what are the facts as a reminder? And your relationships evolve with maturity when you incorporate healthy coping habits and thought patterns, and your nervous system will thank you too. I want to see if that's all I had on. That's all I have written. So I took a while to record this episode of Trauma Talk, and I will be recording another episode of Trauma Talk shortly. Please subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate that. And send me any comments on what you would like to see or what you would like to have covered at some point. I think I'm going to go back into this one and add to it for the Trauma Talk episode 13. And we'll get into some of the ways that we can soothe ourselves, because I didn't really go too far into what we can do to soothe. So let's cover that in the next episode. And I will see you later with Trauma Talk episode 13. Bye. And you can also find me on Calm Spaces and on all social media, either through Tanya Baldwin or Mind, Body, Spirit, Healthy, and also at my website, www.mindbodyspirithealthyself.com.